locally within your structures. And one of the more interesting things to try and implement as a leader these days is shared value. And we're going to talk a lot about shared value over the next couple of days. And it's hard because people don't always know what it is, why you're doing it, and who the helpers and hinderers within your organisation are. So let's unpack it a little bit. What is shared value, and more importantly, what is it not? I'm going to overgeneralise, and some people will take challenge with some of the things I'm about to say. That's okay. What shared value is not is corporate social responsibility. If I overgeneralise, corporate social responsibility, and many companies now have a target of putting 1 or 2% of pre-tax profit towards corporate social responsibility. Fund the opera, the tennis club, paint rocks white, whatever. Try to find something in a socially responsible sense. You create a director of social responsibility, give them that 1 or 2% of pre-tax profit, and then walk away. What about the other 99% of profit? What about all of the other things? That's what shared value is. It's looking at all your external facing footprints of your business, human resources, sales, procurement, and asking yourself, how do you fine tune each of those to get enhanced corporate value or profitability, and I will talk about the difference between value and profit in a second, and enhanced community outcomes. Let me give you an example. BHP Billiton, the world's largest mining company, runs, or they did until they divested South 32, the world's most effective anti-malaria program. Why would a mining company run an anti-malaria program? It's in Mosul, Mozambique, where they have an aluminium smelter. They lowered adult malaria infection from 92% of the population to 5.6%. The improved community health dropped absenteeism in the workforce from 22% to 2%, and that improved the productivity of the asset by an amount higher than the cost of the program. In other words, it was directly, measurably profitable. To which many in the left wing say, see, aren't they evil? They are doing things just for profit. To which my response is, no, it's actually good. In many ways, we need to rehabilitate profit as an incentive. Because many in the left wing will talk about social sustainability, and it's right to talk about that. Many people on the left wing will talk about environmental sustainability, and it's right to talk about that. But what many in the left wing forget is financial sustainability. If you only have 2 out of those 3, if you forget one, social or environmental or financial, if you forget one of those 3 pillars, the other 2 will eventually fall over. And what BHP did with that anti-malaria program is found 3 legs of sustainability. So I then ask you, when will they cut that program? And the answer is, well, never. That's profitable. It makes sense. If it were only corporate social responsibility, and most people in companies know CSR depends very heavily on the whim of a senior manager. I like this project, so we'll do it. CEO leaves, a new CEO comes in, I now like this project. It's very ad hoc. Whereas shared value is more than that. It's understanding all of those external facing footprints. Like, who would have thought malaria or anti-malaria would be profitable? Let's call that on the human resources side. Let's have another example from the mining sector in procurement, because how could you possibly do shared value in procurement? It's got to be one of the world's most boring things, unless you're a chief procurement officer. So Rio Tinto is developing a mine called Oyu Tolgoi in the south of Mongolia, in the South Gobi Desert, 60 kilometres from the Chinese border. Nearest population centre, it's a town called Hanbog, which 5 years ago had 1,500 people, no reticulated water, no electricity, no sewage. For this mine, Rio Tinto needed a lot of basic things like boots, uniforms, helmets, bread, bottled water. And the local economy just simply did not have the capacity to provide those things. It would be much cheaper in the short run for Rio to run across the border into China, buy all of those things and bring them into Mongolia. But if you look at life of mine, which, depending on which geologist you speak to, in Oyu Tolgoi is somewhere between 50 and 100 years, a whole lot of other options open up. So what Rio did is they created a whole lot of microfinance loans and provided these microfinance loans largely to women, because everyone knows women pay microfinance loans back at a rate much higher than men do. Why? Women invest it and build it, and men drink it. Sorry guys, might sound sexist, but women are better at this than we are. And they gave these loans to women to create these businesses, to provide these supplies necessary for the mine on 3 conditions. Condition 1, comply with Rio's global occupational health and safety standards. Why? 1, there's a reputation risk for Rio if a subcontractor kills people. And 2, Rio's got all the data to show you that killing people is actually expensive. It is very expensive to retrain, re-recruit, and all of that sort of stuff, as well as it being the right thing not to kill people. Second condition, comply with quality control, because if you comply with quality control, Rio will do something that Grameen Bank and a lot of the other microfinance lenders can never do, and that is become the core foundation customer for the business. If you comply with OH&S and you comply with quality control, we'll buy the stuff. So you're providing the finance to get a business up and running, and being the foundation customer, so almost guaranteeing that that business will work. And the third condition I find the most interesting, that the microfinance recipient had to work with Rio to market their product to every other mine in Mongolia. Why? Well, Rio's copper mine is competing with the copper mine in Chile. It's not competing with the coal mine in Mongolia. So if those uniforms and boots are sold to the coal mine in Mongolia, the unit cost drops, the input cost drops for Rio, and they're better able to compete with the copper mine in Chile. How's that for shared value? And in the end, after a couple of years of running that program, Rio Tinto was responsible for 21% of the adult employment in the South Gobi region of Mongolia, creating a brand new capacity within the Mongolian economy to provide things that can sustain that Mongolian economy and many people in employment for years. Because one of the greatest outputs in a shared value sense that corporations often forget, don't value and don't report on is the impact of salaries. Let me give you a piece of data. Rio Tinto spends $300 million a year, more or less depending on the year, on community engagement, or broadly speaking, old-style corporate social responsibility programs. It spends about $900 million a year on Indigenous salaries. Can we count that as development? Many people say, no, you can't count salaries, to which my response is, well, the UN does. When the UN does development in third world economies, it counts not only salaries of local staff, it counts salaries of expatriates. When I worked for the UN in Pakistan, my salary was counted as a Pakistan program cost, even though it never even came to Pakistan. My daily subsistence allowance came to Pakistan, fine, count that, but my salary sat in the bank in Switzerland. Not because I'm trying to avoid tax, but I was just based in Geneva, so that's where you have bank accounts. Sounds nice to say I have a Swiss bank account, but it's just normal. So if the UN can count salaries, why can't Rio Tinto? So if you count salaries and community engagement programs, there's $1.2 billion spent by one company in the developing world, and to put that in context, the United Nations Development Program, the international organisation we rely upon to bring the world out of poverty, has core funding of $1 billion. More than that in non-core funding, but core funding of $1 billion. In other words, Rio Tinto alone, when you count salaries and community engagement spending, spends more to bring the world out of poverty than the core funding of the United Nations Development Program. Which brings me to a really interesting stat. If you track capital flows from OECD to non-OECD economies, 53% of capital flows come through the private sector, 30% of capital flows go through remittances, that is expatriate workers sending money home, and 17% goes through official development assistance, foreign aid, and philanthropy. Which then raises this question. When Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt run around the world, and by the way, I've got to say I like Angelina and Brad. I hosted them to a couple of countries, and Angelina, unlike a lot of visiting celebrities, is actually really good. She's not high maintenance. She looks after herself. She reads up on stuff. She's really, really good. So I'm not meaning to criticise her in this. But when she and Brad run around and say the way to bring the world out of poverty is to double foreign aid, my response is that is the smallest pot of money and often the worst spent pot of money. So why is that the solution? If we look at those three big capital flows, 53% through the private sector, 30% through remittances and 17% through aid and philanthropy, surely we should look at creating global partnerships roughly in that proportion. And if we look at bringing the world out of poverty, surely the major partner is the private sector, 53%. And what should the role of aid be? It should be to set the enabling environment to allow for private sector investment to thrive. So let's go back to Rwanda. Why has Rwanda done so well in the last 15 years? And so many people in the West have a view of Africa that's 20 years out of date. War, famine, starvation. That's what people still think when they think of Africa. They don't think 5 of the 7 fastest growing economies in the last 10 years are sub-Saharan Africa. And why is Rwanda known as the CEO's friend? It did 4 things. It liberated the exchange rate mechanism, it allowed for repatriation of profit, enforceability of contracts under local law and zero tolerance for corruption. There's still a problem with corruption in Rwanda, but it's the highest ranked sub-Saharan African country on the Transparency International Index. Imagine if we were able to build those partnerships between the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, multilateral aid and philanthropy to create an all-of-economy intervention rather than just an all-of-government or individual corporate interventions. That's the framework that we could have used when I say, imagine if we had have done Iraq differently and how much different the strategic level of the world would be. And it all comes back to shared value. Getting companies to think that it's not a question of doing good or being profitable. You can do good and be profitable, and in fact, if you do the partnerships right, you will create the enabling environment in which your profitability will be sustained over a much longer period of time. And once I have said that, do I need to even answer the question, why? Why do shared value? Why do shared value? Because it will make you more profitable and it will improve the value of your business. And again, I'll come back to profit and value. But now let's come back to the human element. Who are the helpers and who are the hinderers? If you are a senior executive in a corporation, how do you get people to think with a shared value mindset? Because in my experience, C-suite people, leading ones, they get it, and boards get it. I understand it. And Generation Y entering the job market, they get it. But a whole bunch of mid-level management just don't. Because that mid-level management came through management training in the 1970s and 1980s when we thought Gordon Gekko was great and greed was good, and we haven't thought outside the box. So the great challenge for leaders in corporations today is turn the hinderers into helpers, explain why we do shared value and what it is to set that strategic framework, and then figure out with their teams, are you leading them into this approach from in front, from beside, or from behind? That's one of the interesting challenges that I hope we will explore a little more over the next couple of days. But let me now go on to 3 possible motivational points. Shared value. Because people talk a lot about it, improving profit, and they forget the value part. Why do I differentiate this? Value. The value of the asset on the balance sheet. That is different from profit. A lot of people forget it and talk about shared value as a profit-making thing. I think it's a value creator in this sense. Let's go back to the resource sector only because it's easier. It's applicable in every other sector, but the resource sector, it's the easiest. Let me go back to that Oyu Tolgoi mine. How does Rio Tinto value that asset? How do you rank that asset in a value risk versus reward framework when you're trying to apply internal corporate capital decisions? I'm going to generalise, I'm going to use false figures for the ease of maths. How do you value the Oyu Tolgoi mine in Mongolia? Again, false figures. So some smart people get together, mainly geologists, and they say the copper ore body is this big on the map. Big. Other smart people get together and say it's going to take us 100 years to build and operate a mine to dig up that much copper ore. And some other smart people get together and say, well, it's going to cost a total of $100 billion to build and operate a mine over 100 years. So hold that in your mind. Cost side of the equation, $100 billion. Some other smart people get together and they go, well, this is what's happened. Ore prices, global economy, human development. We think over the next 100 years you're going to be able to sell that copper for $150 billion. But that doesn't make it a $50 billion asset, 150 minus 100, because you have to discount that future revenue. And smart companies will discount that future revenue for three factors. One, cost of holding money. Two, sovereign risk. Will the government change? But the really smart companies put in a third one, social risk. Because everyone who's worked in the resource sector know the asset-destroying risks are not the technical risks, it's the outside the fence risks. That's the social risks. At the extreme example, and I hate to pick on Rio Tinto, Bougainville. Bougainville, a little island off the north coast of Papua New Guinea. In 1989, there was the Panguna copper mine. It was responsible for 30% of Papua New Guinea's export earnings. It was a multi-billion-dollar asset. Back in the 1980s, companies, before they'd even discovered social responsibility, let alone shared value, they would say, we only need a legal licence to operate. Social licence to operate, that's fluffy. Issues of fiscal transfers from central to regional government, none of our business. Local development, none of our business. Job creation, none of our business. We've got our legal licence to operate, we pay our tax to the government, and the government should do all of that. And the problem for Rio Tinto in 1989 is that the government didn't do that. There were no fiscal transfers, there was no regional development, there was no community development. So the people on Bougainville Island didn't feel that they were getting anything from this mine in their back garden. So they created a thing called the Bougainville Revolutionary Army, started a civil war, and the mine closed. When did the mine reopen? It hasn't. 26 years later. And indeed, in the peace agreement between the people of Bougainville and the people of Papua New Guinea, there is a referendum previewed for the future for Bougainville sometime between the years 2015 and 2020, i.e. now. So Rio's about to get stuck into a vortex of a political dispute between Bougainville and Papua New Guinea that they can't get out of for the next 5 years, because the Bougainvillians, to have the referendum, need to be able to show their economic viability and can't do that without the mine opening. So suddenly the people who closed the mine now want to reopen, and what will you do if you're Rio Tinto in the middle of that mess? And what 1989 showed to Rio is you took a multi-billion-dollar asset and you made the value not just zero, but negative. Overnight. That was the come to mama moment. Companies that do first corporate social responsibility and now shared value well, companies that really understand it, have often had a big screw up. And this was Rio's. Not because they've taken a get nice pill and realised we don't want Bougainville to happen again because it's the right thing, although that's part of the reason. From a purely financial, corporate balance sheet perspective, it's too expensive to ignore social risk. When it goes wrong, it goes catastrophically wrong. Took a multi-billion-dollar asset and made it zero overnight. That's the value impact of shared value. It's avoiding a negative like that. It's understanding your communities so you don't have a Bougainville. And you can, if your management is right, measure that negative through the impact of the social risk discount rating on the NPV. So let's go back to that. $150 billion, those three discount factors, cost of holding money, sovereign risk, social risk. For the ease of maths, let me put 10% on each of those. 30% discount. 30% discount of $150 billion, $45 billion. So net present revenue, 150 billion minus 45 billion is 105 billion dollars. The cost was 100 billion, remember? So 105 minus 100, net present value, $5 billion. The power of that number is it's the number that you can put on the balance sheet. It's declared to the stock exchange. It will impact on your stock price and it will impact on your executive remuneration. Very powerful number. Let me now drop the social risk discount from 10% to 5. Not because I put my finger in the air, but because I do genuine programs that the people want. So I lower the community discount from 10 to 5. 5% of 150 billion is 7.5 billion. I therefore improve my net present revenue by 7.5 billion. I therefore improve my net present value from 5 billion plus 7.5 billion equals $12.5 billion. I more than double the value of the asset by lowering my social risk. And I lower my social risk because I do shared value, not just corporate social responsibility. And if I've done that shared value right, I also get improved profitability because I'm lowering my cost curves, like the procurement chain in Rio or the anti-malaria program in Mozambique. So shared value isn't just about profit, it's also about value. And then we come to this third bullet point, application of capital. So one of the many hats I'm wearing, as you heard in the introduction, is I run a superannuation fund in Australia. That's a pension fund. We have $2 trillion of funds under management within Australia's superannuation system. It's patient capital. It has to be. You join the job market at the age of 20, you can't touch your money till the age of 65. That's 45 years. Your money is held in your name. It's different from the US system. It's patient capital. So why are we worried about quarterly returns? It's nuts. When you're invested with a 45-year mindset, why are you worried about quarterly returns? And this is the really interesting challenge that's happening now. Patient capital, retirement funds, is worth multi-trillions of dollars around the world. Add Norway to Australia, and you've got 5 trillion there, without even looking at the UK, US, or any other country. And it's patient capital. And here's the thing about patient capital. If you invest in a company that's got bad ethics will come back and bite you in the bum at some point. You can only get away with problems for so long. Will the problem come up in 1 year, 5 years, or 10 years? I don't know. It will come up, and if I'm patient capital, it'll come up on my watch and will destroy my value. And if you doubt me, I've got 2 letters for you, VW. Because if you invested in VW 10 years ago, you're still behind the 8 ball now that the stock price has gone down because half a dozen people decided it was good to cheat on engine testing. I don't believe that for a second, by the way. Not for a second. At the very minimum, the board set a corporate culture in which some senior managers, and how senior would you have to have been to commission that computer program, test that computer program, and then place it in every diesel vehicle sold? That's some pretty senior honky, right? The board, whether they were directly involved or not, set the culture where that senior person thought it was okay. And not only thought it was okay, thought they would get away with it forever, which I think is the most nuts part, because there's no way you're going to get away with that forever. One day you'd get caught, and it's just a rich irony that Volkswagen gets caught because an NGO who wanted to prove that Americans didn't buy enough diesel engines, wanted to show how good diesel was, found out how bad it was. That's just one of the rich ironies. So the application of capital is the new addition to shared value. And with my King's College hat on, as well as with my Good Super hat on, we are now analysing how can you put better transparency around things like the NPV calculations to use for the application of capital. In Good Super, when we are looking at investment options, we use shared value as a due diligence pre-filter for the application of capital. We want to know what are the ethics of a company so the Volkswagen doesn't happen. But there are no clear objective indicators that you can use for that at the moment, so we use a proxy. So when a company comes to us and says, do you want to put some capital in us, my question to them is, tell me about your shared value. And if they talk to me about corporate social responsibility, I send them out the door and won't even look at their numbers, because they haven't got what I'm talking about. What is shared value? It's understanding all your external facing footprints of your business, procurement, sales, human resources, maximising the impacts on communities and profitability to ensure you improve profit, improve your value and avoid catastrophic failure that you get in cases like VW. And this is why this graph then becomes important. Because when ethical investing started 15 years ago or thereabouts, people would say, take a 2 or a 3% cut on your return to invest ethically. That was the pitch of ethical investing. Oh, you're not going to get as good a return, but you're going to do the right thing. Well, that's rubbish. A.T. Kearney did this study for me. Over the last 10 years, 5 years, 3 years and 1 year, ethical investing funds, which is the red column, have outperformed the broader market by between 1 and 3%. And when you start asking why, it's really simple. Good ethical behaviour has a lower long-term risk framework and therefore long-term risk-adjusted returns will always be better. Always. And as we have a growing interest of patient capital through retirement funds, more patient capital providers are understanding that framework where MPV is impacted by shared value activities because good shared value activities lower your risk and make your returns superior. It changes completely the marketing pitch. Not only will you do good, but you're not going to do good and take a cut on your return. You're going to do good and get a superior return. Imagine that. I promise you, lower risk, good behaviour and better return. Who's not going to do that? And we haven't yet got to the world where providers of capital have twigged onto that. Cornerstone Capital, on my other hand, we do. Now, I've spoken a lot about developing world contexts, Rio in Mongolia, BHP in Mozambique, but shared value can apply just as much in developed settings as well, countries like our own. Rio Tinto, the leading employer of Indigenous Australians, hiring people in place means you don't have to fly in, fly out staff, an enormous cost savings. Arthritis Victoria, where I come from, they reckon, and I'm sure that the figures in the United States will be somewhere similar, 23% of Australians have arthritis. Arthritis Victoria have an arthritis management plan that they think improves productivity in the workplace. So rather than looking for a corporate social responsibility partnership with a corporation, i.e. give me some money, they're looking for a shared value partnership, which is, if you let me into your staff and pick your job types that are most susceptible to arthritis and the companies that have a high proportion of those employees, do a baseline measure on your productivity, put in your arthritis management plans, then have your productivity measure after that and do a profit share on the productivity gain. That way, Arthritis Victoria is not going to get donations of $10,000 or $50,000. It's going to do profit shares that you measure in the millions. If they're right. If they can actually establish that their arthritis measurement and arthritis management is a productivity tool. And that is in the developed world settings. So it's easy to come up with shared value in the developing world. It's harder in the developed world, but the gains are just as good. And then let me bring you to failed and fragile states. Right when I started with that hypothesis, imagine if about Iraq. Failed and fragile states that do not get economic growth descend back into armed conflict every single time. The data is clear. If you get economic growth, you might avoid that descent back into conflict, you might not. So economic growth is a condition precedent but not a guarantor. In other words, you cannot hope to build peace and security, stability and peace-building processes in post-conflict or even post-natural disaster settings if you don't have a plan for economic growth, and you can't have a plan for economic growth if you don't include the private sector in the planning process. So why don't military and political planners who are looking to invade countries bring the private sector in and say, how the heck do we rebuild afterwards? Because, after all, 53% of capital flows go through the private sector. One of the things we're now doing at King's College is partnering up with our war studies and saying, how do we change that? How do we change that? How do we get people excited about investing in difficult environments? How do we change the international regulatory regime to encourage better investment, to take the lesson from Rwanda? Transparency of exchange rate mechanisms, repatriation of profits, enforceability of contracts under local laws, and zero tolerance for corruption. Focus that 17% of aid and philanthropy into the area that the private sector is not good at, governance and regulation. And aid and philanthropy shouldn't go into the stuff where aid and philanthropy isn't very good, job creation. Let aid and philanthropy do this stuff with government, create the enabling environment to let the private sector do this stuff, job creation, economic growth, and bring people out of poverty. Imagine if we actually structured the world very differently and realised in the street that the mining companies, the banks, the big multinationals aren't actually the evil buggers that we all say they are. They're actually the key part of bringing the world out of poverty. Now, Bono has smelled the coffee. I'm waiting for Angelina and Brad to do it. The way to bring the world out of poverty isn't to double foreign aid. It is to create the partnership between the 53%, the 30%, and the 17% of great capital flows, and have the good leaders inside corporations, government, and NGOs to come collaboratively around the table and say, how do we create a single plan that we all have a role in playing, and recognise that strategy is all about the human element. How do we pick the right motivators for the right people to achieve the good outcome? That is the human element of strategy. Thank you.